What if a judge was attacked in her own courtroom, and no one said a word? In just 7 minutes, this story unravels the silent conspiracy behind the assault on Judge Naomi Ellison, the footage they tried to erase, and the quiet insiders who turned the tide. If you believe truth deserves a witness, like, share, and subscribe now. One video, one voice, one system cracking from the inside. It began like any other morning inside Courtroom 4. Fluorescent lights humming, ceiling fans slicing slow arcs above polished wood, and the faint shuffle of paper as lawyers settled in. No one could have guessed what was coming. At precisely 10:28 a.m., the gavel had not yet fallen, but Judge Naomi Ellison was already reviewing her files with clinical precision, eyes scanning the printed testimony of a young man who'd been bruised, detained, and nearly broken by men wearing badges. The room was full, yet the silence was unnatural, thick, coiled, waiting. Seated in the front row was Officer Craig Vonn, his presence stiff, too confident. His uniform was crisp, his jaw locked tight, and behind his sunglasses, never removed indoors, there was something colder than contempt. Naomi Ellison had spent 23 years in the judiciary. Her courtroom didn't run on theatrics or declarations. It ran on quiet, on control, on memory. She was a woman who never raised her voice, never paused for applause, and never compromised the law to make someone comfortable. With deep brown skin and silver-streaked braids tucked neatly into a low bun, she carried both poise and burden in her silence. To some, she was the voice of order. To others, a threat. For months, whispers had followed her, not in headlines, but in elevators, parking garages, hallways without cameras. She had ruled against officers. She had questioned evidence. She had called for disciplinary hearings. And now, she was about to call for something more dangerous, a full internal investigation into repeated police misconduct, naming specific officers, including Craig Vonn. The air in the courtroom changed when she said the words, "This bench recommends a criminal review of Officer Vonn's actions under federal jurisdiction." It was not loud, it did not echo, but it struck the room like a depth charge. Reporters paused their typing. The stenographer blinked. One officer coughed once and didn't move again. Vonn didn't speak. He didn't shout. He just stood. And then it happened. There was no warning, no raised voice, no sudden escalation. Just a pop, sharp, metallic, like a firecracker split through the air. A flash of blue-white light streaked across the courtroom, and then Judge Naomi Ellison's body jolted back, as if pulled by invisible strings. Her chair toppled. Her arms flailed once. Her robe billowed open. She hit the ground hard enough for the sound to echo through the walls. For a second, maybe two, no one moved. A courtroom full of trained professionals, prosecutors, public defenders, officers, clerks, all frozen. The only one who moved was Craig Vonn. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't even lower his taser. He just stood there, smirking. Naomi's body twitched once more on the floor. The stun gun's arc had struck just below her shoulder, close to the spine. She lay motionless after the third jolt, the robe tangled at her side, exposing the neat blouse she wore beneath. It was Camilla J., her assistant, who broke the paralysis first. She rushed to Naomi's side, her heels clacking hard against the tiles. Her voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "Someone call medical. Now!" 3 officers moved. 2 toward Camilla. 1 toward the door. But no one moved toward Vonn. No one restrained him. And still, the courtroom cameras, silent observers in every corner, captured it all. Especially one, a forgotten rear-angle unit mounted near the emergency exit. It had a full view of the judge, the officer, the moment of impact, and the look in Vonn's eyes just before he fired. That look mattered, because Vonn didn't act out of panic, or confusion, or self-defense. He acted with calm deliberation, with knowledge of what would happen next, with the assurance of someone who believed, utterly, that the system would clean up after him. That same system responded in eerily practiced rhythm. Within 5 minutes, courtroom access was restricted. The live feed was disrupted due to technical interference. Medical arrived in 7. Naomi was removed on a stretcher, unconscious but breathing. Vonn was not arrested. He wasn't even questioned. Not that day. He was quietly escorted to a waiting vehicle, a clipboard in hand, his uniform unwrinkled. By noon, the official report said she collapsed due to health complications during session. No mention of the taser, no mention of Vonn. But 5 people had already seen the uncut footage. One was Marcus Reed, the man no one ever quoted, but everyone feared inside the federal oversight circle. Another was Camilla, who stayed at the hospital for 6 hours, guarding Naomi's bag. Inside it, a sealed USB. The courtroom logs, her handwritten notes, a folded letter she never got to read aloud. The media, by late afternoon, began circulating blurry cell phone clips from the public gallery. Just before the courtroom was locked down. None showed the taser, but the sound was unmistakable. It spread anyway. 7 seconds of silence before the scream. 11 seconds before the bailiff moved. Naomi didn't wake that night. She remained under watch, vitals stable, jaw clenched as if her body refused to let go. Her family wasn't allowed full access. One nurse reported that a man in a gray suit visited briefly, showed credentials she couldn't read, and left without giving his name. Outside the hospital, small clusters of people gathered. No signs, no chants, just people waiting, watching. Some had worked under Naomi. Some had lost loved ones she'd defended in court. One man sat in silence for 4 hours with a handwritten message on his lap. She stood for us. Now we stand for her. And Craig Vonn, he disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no reprimand. He was on leave, according to the one-sentence statement from the precinct. But he left something behind in that courtroom. A message. Not just to Naomi, but to every judge, clerk, or lawyer who ever considered challenging the culture of immunity around certain officers. The message was clear. This is what happens when you try. What Vonn didn't count on was the recording. What he didn't expect was how many people had seen, had remembered, had saved pieces of truth. And what he definitely didn't know, what made this more than an attack, was that behind Naomi Ellison's courtroom bench, embedded in the paneling since renovations 5 years prior, was a backup audio and video capture system. One that wasn't listed on public specs. One that recorded directly to federal secure servers. Someone activated it. Someone made sure it uploaded. And someone else, very quietly, started watching. This wasn't just an assault. This was an alarm. And it had been heard. The storm didn't end when Judge Naomi Ellison collapsed in her courtroom. It only changed shape. While news anchors debated whether her fall had been medical or malicious, while local officials scrambled to issue statements full of careful vagueness, and while Officer Craig Vonn vanished behind a wall of bureaucratic leave, Elijah Trent was already moving. Quietly. Precisely. Like he always did. Elijah wasn't a name that rang out in headlines. His business was silence, and he wore it like a second skin. He had no social media, no public biography, and no formal title anyone outside the system could understand. Officially, he was Deputy Liaison for Judicial Continuity and Ethics Enforcement, a phrase designed to put most people to sleep. But inside the federal oversight web, everyone knew who he was. Elijah was the man you called when the law was under attack, from within. It was 2 hours past midnight, and the city was sleeping. Inside a third-floor walk-up in a converted records building, Elijah sat alone in a room that hadn't changed in 8 years. Flickering desk lamp, soundproof walls, and 3 layers of analog locks on the door. In front of him, 5 secure files flagged with red notations. One name appeared in each. Naomi Ellison. He had been tracking her for over 6 months, not as a threat, as a variable. She was one of only a handful of judges in the region whose decisions consistently disrupted local law enforcement patterns. Her rulings against illegal search practices, her pushback on thin evidence, her refusal to accept standard procedure as justification for civil harm. All of it made her an anomaly in a system that preferred quiet compliance. And now she had been attacked by an officer. In open court, Elijah replayed the footage again, frame by frame. Not the public clip. Not the phone camera versions. The sealed internal recording, uploaded automatically from a courtroom sensor most people didn't know existed. The hidden circuit. He watched it 3 times. The angle was perfect. Craig Vonn, standing tall, eyes fixed on the bench, his left hand twitching, twice, his right hand sliding to his hip. And then a subtle nod. Barely a tilt of the chin. Off-screen, another officer nodded back. Not much, but enough. Then the taser came up, fired. No reaction from others, no panic, no chaos, just calculation. Elijah paused the video, zoomed in. Timestamps were synced down to the millisecond. 10:28 and 41 seconds a.m. The arc of the taser was visible. So was Naomi's face, shocked but not panicked, as if she understood, in that last second before the jolt, exactly what was happening. She had seen it coming, and yet she didn't move. Elijah leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen twice against the desk. He'd seen this pattern before. Not the attack, but the orchestration. The alignment of roles. The absence of visible command, but the presence of coordinated intent. This wasn't just a rogue officer acting on impulse. This was a message. He opened a restricted folder titled SCNet, short for Shadow Coordination Network, an unofficial term used among a handful of internal monitors across agencies. The SCNet wasn't an agency. It wasn't even a structure. It was a behavior, an algorithm of alignment, where multiple actors across departments acted independently, yet converged on outcomes that benefited one shared goal: silence dissent, neutralize threats, and protect the order. Naomi had become a threat, and someone had flipped the switch. Elijah's screen blinked as he authorized access to a surveillance map. Green dots populated across the city. Courthouses, precincts, field offices. He tapped the location log for courtroom 4. The timestamp from 10 to 11 a.m. showed overlapping presence from 5 officers, 3 administrative staff, and 1 external consultant whose name had been blacked out. He ran a decrypt. The name appeared: Royce Keller, former precinct commander, currently listed as a liaison consultant for interdepartmental training. He'd been quietly reassigned 6 months earlier after a misconduct case was settled off-record. Elijah leaned forward. Interest sharpened. Keller wasn't supposed to be in that courtroom. He wasn't assigned to any trial that day. Yet there he was, logged by the security badge system 5 minutes before the hearing started. No mention in official notes. No seating chart record. He checked another file. Craig Vonn's disciplinary record. Over 10 excessive force complaints in 8 years. None sustained, 5 settled. 2 officers who filed internal objections had since transferred out of state. Another pattern. Elijah clicked open Naomi's judicial log. her notes from prior hearings. In red pen, on a slip of paper attached to her file, she had written, "He doesn't escalate to dominate. He escalates to test immunity." Vonn had been watched, tracked. She was preparing something, maybe a referral to the state's attorney general, maybe a handoff to the Department of Justice. Now she was in a hospital bed, and the system had already begun sealing the cracks. But Elijah Trent didn't work inside cracks. He worked beneath them. By 3 a.m., he had created a secure channel. 4 recipients. No names, only signals. He assigned one contact, Omega 2, to begin surveillance of Officer Vonn's known associates. Another, Delta 7, was flagged to pull internal logs from the Police Oversight Council. Then he picked up the phone. Not a smartphone. A rotary handset connected to a secure line known only to 4 departments. He dialed slowly. "Trent here," he said. "Initiate a silent flag on courtroom 4. Archive everything. Elevate Naomi Ellison to blue priority." The voice on the other end didn't ask why. They only said, "Confirmed." He hung up and sat still, because this was the part he hated most. The waiting. The knowledge that something monstrous had moved just enough to touch daylight, then crawled back beneath the floorboards. But Naomi had seen it, and now so had he. He glanced at the flickering lamp. It hummed faintly, almost as if it, too, were straining to stay alive through the hours of silence. He returned to the video, watched Vonn smile as he was led from the courtroom, watched the others not react, not object, not even blink. Then he opened a fresh folder. Title: Naomi Jadi Ellison, Case Alpha, Row 1. And he began to type. Camilla J. had always been invisible, and she preferred it that way. In a building stacked with personalities, lawyers posturing for verdicts, officers asserting authority, clerks whispering behind every closed door, Camilla moved like smoke. Quiet, efficient, unseen. For nearly 3 years, she had worked beside Judge Naomi Ellison, not as a shadow, but as a constant. The kind of presence who remembered which file went missing last August, who noticed when courtroom microphones stayed on a few seconds too long, who knew how to cross-reference draft orders and detect when paragraphs disappeared without explanation. She wasn't flashy. She didn't need to be. She remembered everything. And now she remembered too much. The morning after the attack, while the city stirred with half-truths and press conferences carefully scripted to say nothing at all, Camilla returned to the courthouse. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce her arrival. She simply showed up just after 7 a.m., using the side entrance known only to senior clerks and security detail. The air inside was heavier than normal, thick with tension and silence. A few officers lingered near the elevators, their posture too casual, their glances too rehearsed. Camilla offered no greeting. Her steps echoed down the east wing, past the shuttered courtroom door where Naomi had been struck down, and into the record room, the one place in the courthouse that was always either forgotten or feared. It was here Naomi kept the second set. Not forged records, not falsified reports, just truth, copied, catalogued, and time-stamped, in case the first set ever changed. Because it had changed. Camilla first noticed inconsistencies 6 months earlier, when a ruling Naomi had issued on a police misconduct case was quietly revised in the digital archives. A paragraph was missing. Nothing dramatic, just a line about the officer's prior infractions being cause for internal review. Gone. Erased. The official record now read, "No sustained violations." At first, Camilla assumed it was an error. She printed both versions and brought them to Naomi without speaking. Naomi read them slowly, then circled the missing line and underlined a word at the bottom corner of the page. Timestamp. That was all she said. But Camilla understood. From that moment forward, they began saving everything, every draft, every ruling, every internal email, stored on physical drives, printed and locked in fireproof folders, and Camilla became the keeper of the records. Now, under fluorescent lights that buzzed louder than usual, she unlocked the second cabinet in the far right wall of the file room. Inside, layered by year, were folders labeled in Naomi's neat block letters, discipline logs, suppression petitions, evidence chain errors, Officer Vonn. Camilla pulled that last one. Inside, notes handwritten in Naomi's scrawl detailed dates and times of Vonn's misconduct cases. Most had been dismissed before making it to court. But what caught Camilla's eye was a paper-clipped report stamped "Redacted" across the middle. She held it up to the light. Beneath the ink, faint outlines of words remained. Coordination. Directive. High-risk judge. Her heart quickened. That was no internal affairs memo. That was a pre-move. She sat at the long table near the printer and powered up her personal laptop, a shielded machine Naomi had gifted her for off-site prep, though both women knew its real purpose. She began downloading Naomi's recent case files, courtroom logs, internal messages between judicial assistants. As she clicked through folders, one opened with an error. Access denied. Modified remotely. She frowned. That file had been untouched for weeks. She tried again. Same result. Somebody inside the system was still editing Naomi's work after the attack. Her hands moved faster now, printing out every email she could find that referenced Officer Craig Vonn, Captain Royce Keller, or the special liaison protocols Naomi had flagged earlier in the month. The printer rattled and hissed, spitting out sheet after sheet. She grabbed each page, stacking them precisely, sealing them into color-coded envelopes. Red for video, blue for correspondence, yellow for rulings. She labeled a master drive. Evidence. Ellison, secure. While she worked, her eyes drifted upward. There, in the far corner of the ceiling, was a camera. She didn't know if it was active, but she knew it had watched her before. She turned her chair slightly, angled her screen away, and finished copying the last folder. Hidden circuit footage. JO 427 MKV. The same rear-angle camera feed that Elijah Trent had been analyzing the night before. She had seen it now, too. And she could not forget. Naomi never flinched. Even as the taser was drawn, even as the nod passed between officers, even as Vonn raised his hand. Naomi had looked straight ahead, reading from her notes, and only when the blue arc lit the room did she move. Backward, violently, soundlessly. The feed ended 5 seconds after her body hit the floor. Just enough time to record Vonn's smirk. Camilla sealed the drive. She checked the windows. No one watched. Still, she moved carefully. She placed the 3 evidence envelopes into a padded document bag lined with aluminum foil, the kind used to block unauthorized scans. She locked it, slipped it under her coat, and walked to the door. Then she turned back. She opened Naomi's desk drawer. Inside were 3 things: a half-used notepad, a court-issue pen, and a folded note Camilla had never seen before. She opened it. One sentence: "If they reach me first, you hold the thread." Camilla didn't cry. She couldn't. Not yet. She slipped the note into her coat and stepped into the hallway. Her heels echoed with precision. Every step measured, deliberate. As she passed the main reception area, she noticed 2 plainclothesmen seated side by side, not talking, not looking at anyone. One of them tapped his finger against a file folder 3 times in a rhythmic beat. A signal. She didn't stop walking. Outside, the wind had picked up. Across the street, a news crew interviewed a man claiming Naomi had collapsed from stress. Behind the anchor, another man held a sign. "Let judges judge. Stop the lies." Camilla crossed the street. She ducked into a coffee shop, pulled out her phone, and opened a secure message app. She typed a single line. Primary circuit engaged. Files secured. Awaiting Trent. She hit send, then deleted the app entirely. At her table, she pulled out the red envelope, video files, and began copying them to another drive. Just in case. The barista called her name. She didn't look up. In her bag, the yellow envelope pulsed against her side. It contained not just Naomi's case rulings, but the patterns no one else had noticed. Officers rotated between departments days before complaints were filed. Court files overwritten in synchronized cycles. Timestamps mismatched by exact 2-minute windows. This wasn't sloppiness. It was coordination. And Naomi had mapped it. Camilla looked out the window. A police car passed slowly, almost too slowly. She didn't flinch. She reached for the blue envelope. Internal emails. She slid her finger across the flap. One more backup. One more layer. Because she understood now, this wasn't just about Naomi, or Vonn, or even that one courtroom. This was about the architecture of silence, the walls behind justice built to echo nothing. But Naomi had spoken, without words, and Camilla J. would remember everything. There are moments when the truth doesn't shout, it glances. 2 seconds. That's all it took. 2 seconds of eye contact. One fractional tilt of the chin. And everything that followed, the taser, the silence, the carefully orchestrated chaos, locked into place like gears in a machine long hidden beneath the courtroom floor. Camilla J. saw it first. While reviewing the backup surveillance footage Naomi had labeled Ext Aisle East, pre-session. It wasn't even the main courtroom view, just a wide-angle feed from the hallway camera facing the chamber entrance. The timestamp read 10:26 a.m., just over 2 minutes before Judge Naomi Ellison took her seat. Craig Vonn stood inside the courtroom gallery, posture rigid, head angled slightly to his right. On the opposite side of the aisle, seated just 4 rows back from the judge's bench, sat a man Camilla didn't immediately recognize. He wore a dark charcoal suit, tailored, his face shadowed by the light spilling through the upper windows. Then, as Vonn shifted his stance, the man looked up and nodded. A tiny movement, subtle, meaningless to anyone not looking for it. But Camilla was looking for it. She isolated the frame, enhanced the clarity, and cross-referenced the facial scan with Naomi's archive of personnel reports. Captain Royce Keller. The name lit up the screen like a warning. Keller wasn't supposed to be there. Not on any seating chart. Not on any trial assignment. Not listed as a supervisor, consultant, or observer. Yet there he was, seated calmly in the courtroom just minutes before a federal judge was assaulted. Watching. Waiting. Signaling. Camilla sent the clip to Elijah Trent within 5 minutes. No message, no subject line, just the footage. He responded with a voice memo, less than 4 seconds long. It's worse than we thought. By noon that same day, Trent had pulled Royce Keller's full personnel file. 31 years in law enforcement, 15 commendations, 5 internal investigations, 0 convictions. The last complaint, filed 6 years ago, had vanished mid-review. Its documentation replaced with a generic file closure citing insufficient evidence. But Trent remembered. He had been assigned to that case back then. Keller had allegedly greenlit a covert pressure team to intimidate witnesses testifying against officers involved in a brutality case. The accusation never reached court. 3 witnesses recanted. The file disappeared. Trent never forgot. And now Keller was back, in the courtroom, just before Vonn's strike. Invisible to the public, visible only to those who knew what to watch for. The web was real. Trent turned to the SCNet logs, Shadow Coordination Network, the unofficial designation for behaviors across law enforcement where informal alliances operated just beneath the policy layer. No written orders, no traceable memos, just timing, glances, handoffs, a gesture here, a silence there. Enough to enact power without accountability. And Royce Keller had been its architect before. Now, it seemed, he was again. Trent ordered a private pull of movement data from that morning. One file stood out. Access badge log for room 417, a restricted side chamber adjacent to courtroom 4, used primarily for security consultations. Keller's badge pinged the reader at 10:09 a.m., 19 minutes before the hearing began. He exited at 10:22 a.m., 6 minutes before the nod. Who else was in the room? Only one name? Officer Thomas Griggs, security liaison for courthouse protocol. Tom. Camilla remembered him. He was always polite, always early. He handled Judge Ellison's courtroom security for months. Nothing flashy. But recently, he'd been moved to a night rotation without explanation. Naomi had noted that shift. In one of her last margin scribbles she'd written, Tom reassigned after Q&A on protocol integrity. Why? Now Trent had the answer. Tom had met with Keller privately, then returned to the courtroom. And just before Naomi was attacked, surveillance showed him glancing, not at Vonn, but at the exit doors, as if tracking escape routes. They weren't trying to kill Naomi. They were trying to send a message and escape with clean hands. Camilla printed the badge logs, the seating chart overlays, the minute-by-minute entry points. Each sheet built the structure of something that couldn't be mistaken for coincidence. It was coordination. But what struck her most was the behavior between Vonn and Keller inside the courtroom. She replayed the footage again, this time in slow motion. Vonn scans the gallery. His eyes stop on Keller. Keller does not move at first. He merely folds his arms. Then Vonn nods, so slight it might be mistaken for a twitch. His hand goes to his hip. Keller responds, one tap of his index finger against his forearm. One blink. Then his head turns slowly toward the bench, toward Naomi. The taser is drawn less than 10 seconds later. No words, no gestures large enough to raise alarms. But this wasn't reaction. This was premeditated choreography. Keller wasn't just a passive observer. He was the signal tower, the conductor behind the curtain. By the time Naomi hit the floor, he was already standing, already walking, out a side door, never approached, never stopped. Only one other person noticed. Trent had footage from the second-floor corridor camera. At 10:31 a.m., 30 seconds after the attack, Keller was seen exiting through a staff-only hallway. A custodian passed him in the hall and later reported he was on a call, muttering something about timing slipping. Camilla included that report in the growing file titled Web Crosslink HA and sealed it. Now they had motive. Now they had method. But to move forward, they needed one more thing. Proof that Keller and Vonn had coordinated before that day. Trent began pulling email logs, codebooks, shared calendar entries. The deeper he went, the more connections emerged. Lunch meetings logged at the same cafe, security briefings signed by both men, event invitations quietly declined at the same moment. The pattern wasn't visible from the top down. It was a cross, a mesh, a web of complicity, woven by men who understood that the real power didn't live in documents. It lived in behavior. And for the first time in years, that behavior had left footprints. Naomi had seen it. Camilla had archived it. Trent had uncovered it. And now the web was beginning to twitch. Because once a thread is pulled, once the wrong 2 seconds are slowed down and watched by the right eyes, the entire thing starts to unravel. Malik Serrano wasn't supposed to matter. 23 years old, quiet, and nearly invisible inside the concrete maze of the courthouse's digital security wing, he was the kind of employee people forgot they met. A junior IT analyst with an entry badge and a government-issued laptop, Malik mostly updated firmware, monitored firewall alerts, and logged camera health reports that no one read. He wore simple polos, typed quietly, and never corrected anyone who called him Marcus or Melvin. But what no one realized, what no one bothered to notice, was that Malik Serrano had a gift. He saw things others missed. It began 2 days before the attack on Judge Naomi Ellison. Malik had been running diagnostics on the courtroom camera feeds, a routine check prompted by the quarterly system refresh. Each courtroom had 6 angles, but courtroom 4 always gave him pause. One camera, tucked in the rear ceiling corner, was never listed on the public specs. He had asked about it once, back when he was still trying to impress supervisors. "Legacy install," they'd said. "Ignore it." So he did, until that Wednesday morning. The incident report came in first. Medical event, Judge Ellison, 10:28 a.m. Malik flagged it for minor review and moved on. But then a routine sync from camera 4B, the legacy feed, flashed an unusual alert. Auto-upload failed. Server responded, "Data volume mismatch. Manual packet review required." He sighed. Packet reviews were tedious. He almost skipped it. But a voice in the back of his mind whispered what had become his quiet rule. Anything they tell you to ignore is worth looking at twice. He opened the file. The footage hit him like a punch. There it was, clear as day. 10:28 a.m., timestamp aligned. Judge Naomi Ellison reading from her notes. Officer Craig Vonn standing rigid in the first row. The nod, the reach, the electric crackle that dropped a woman of law and honor to the floor, and the smirk that followed. It wasn't a medical event. It was a sanctioned hit. Malik froze. His finger hovered over the keyboard. He played it again, slower. Then he opened the official archive of the same courtroom feed, the one already stored in the judicial media server. It was different, shorter by 12 seconds. The nod was gone. The frame cut at the exact moment Naomi's body convulsed. No taser arc, no officer in frame, just the sound of a gasp, followed by a hard edit and a jump to courtroom staff rushing to assist. It was a lie, and someone had edited it fast. Malik leaned back, heart racing. He could have reported it up the chain, but he'd seen what happened when you did that. He wasn't new. He was low, but he wasn't naive. One analyst 3 years ago flagged a data breach in a deputy's personal communications. 2 weeks later, he was reassigned to the traffic division's basement server room with no windows and no air conditioning. Malik wasn't going to the basement. He was going off-grid. He waited until after hours, when most of the staff had left, and the building settled into its nocturnal hum. Fans droning, the occasional footstep from night maintenance. He took his personal encrypted drive, slipped it under his hoodie, and walked 2 floors down to storage room 3B. A disused file vault turned janitorial overflow. He'd fixed the network switch in that room once. No one had disabled the port. At 11:27 p.m., Malik plugged in. He copied both video files, the original and the edited version. Then he added internal access logs, pull records from digital security showing who touched the file last. The name at the top of the chain, T. Griggs, Tom. It all connected now. He wrapped the files into a secure folder, encrypted them, then split the encryption key into 2 parts, one for Elijah Trent and the other for someone he wasn't sure he could trust, but knew he had to try. Camilla J. He had never spoken to her, but her name was in Naomi's system logs, dozens of cross-reference lookups, document pulls, timestamp checks. She wasn't just a clerk. She was the last one Naomi trusted. Malik opened a secure data relay through a private VPN and began uploading the folder. His eyes flicked to the door. Footsteps echoed outside. Not fast, just casual. Someone doing rounds, or pretending to. The upload bar crawled across the screen. 30%, 40, 55. His mouth was dry. Every breath sounded like thunder. Then a voice outside the door, low, male, joking. Another chuckled reply. 2 guards. Or maybe staff. Maybe not. 74%. He could hear keys jangling. The lock to the next room clicked. 89%. He prayed no one remembered room 3B had a live network port. Upload complete. Transfer confirmed. Malik yanked the drive out and slid it into his boot. Not his pocket. They always check pockets. He powered down the laptop, wrapped the cord, and slid the device into a janitor's bin beneath a tarp. The footsteps passed. He didn't exhale until he was 3 hallways away. By the time Elijah Trent received the file at 4:31 a.m., he was already working off of Camilla's packet from the day before. Now, the 2 stories overlapped perfectly. Camilla had the pattern, the files, the redacted directives. Malik had the proof of the edit, the direct video contradiction, and the chain of custody that led right to Tom and beyond, to Captain Royce Keller. Elijah didn't smile. He never did in moments like these. But he did close his eyes for 3 full seconds, like a man confirming a long-feared suspicion. The footage was real. The edits were deliberate. And the insider? He had just lit a fuse under a steel fortress. The following afternoon, Camilla received an anonymous email on a burner account Naomi had helped her create months ago. The subject line read, "One more pair of eyes." Inside, no message. Just the same unedited footage she had already watched, and a new file, a screen recording of system logs showing the edit trail. She stared at the sender tag. It wasn't a name, just a string of numbers and symbols. But she knew who it was. Someone who had been watching, waiting, recording. Like her. The chain was no longer broken. It was activated. They weren't alone anymore. It was 10 days after the courtroom assault when Judge Naomi Ellison returned to the courthouse. Not through the front steps, not through the staff entrance lined with cameras, but through the side door near the maintenance dock. She wore no robe, no makeup, no symbolic armor of office. Just a gray blouse, dark slacks, and a scarf wrapped loose around her throat, where the taser's mark still lingered beneath the skin. She walked slowly, but not weakly. Her spine was straighter than expected, her gaze unshaken. But her silence was different now. Not the silence of composure. This was the silence of someone listening carefully for betrayal. The elevator creaked on the way to the 4th floor, where she had spent the last 11 years presiding over some of the most complex criminal misconduct cases in the state. But this morning, her nameplate had already been removed from her chamber door. In its place, a blank bracket. As if she'd never existed in that hallway. As if history could be erased with a screwdriver. A clerk she didn't recognize nodded too quickly, then looked away. Naomi said nothing. Her new assignment was waiting. Digitally, of course. The message had arrived just after midnight. Effective immediately, Judge Ellison will be reassigned to Family and Small Claims Division, Courtroom 2A. All ongoing cases will be redistributed pending reassessment by Judicial Placement Board. She read it once, twice, then pressed delete. But before the message disappeared, she opened her personal archive. With slow, practiced hands, she exported a copy of the memo, saved it to a local drive, and encrypted it into a hidden folder marked only with the initials repenned, her quiet shorthand for retaliation pending. Because Naomi Ellison wasn't confused. She wasn't shocked. She knew exactly what was happening. They couldn't silence her with violence, so now they would isolate her through bureaucracy. stripping her docket, reassigning her to civil arbitration, reducing her presence to property disputes and custody squabbles. This was the institution's version of exile. No press release, no reprimand, just a redirection. A soft punishment hidden beneath paperwork. It was cleaner than a forced resignation, more efficient than confrontation, and nearly impossible to protest without sounding paranoid. But Naomi wasn't here to protest. She was here to watch. The office in 2A was small. The paint peeled at the corners, and one fluorescent light buzzed constantly near the door. No portrait of past judges, no court seal mounted behind the desk. Just a plain chair and a desk that listed slightly to the right. Naomi didn't flinch. She opened her bag, removed her notebook, and placed it in the center of the desk like a ritual. She had seen this tactic before. When she'd ruled against a group of officers accused of coordinated evidence tampering 6 years ago, the following month she was given no jury trials for 5 weeks. After exposing corruption in the district hiring process, she was reassigned to oversee tax hearings in a satellite building no one used. The system didn't retaliate like a hammer. It retaliated like fog. Soft, slow, suffocating. But this time, something was different. Because this time she wasn't alone. Camilla J., still working 2 floors up, had started noticing changes as well. First, her access credentials were downgraded. Then her court-issued phone began experiencing syncing issues. And then came the note. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. A standard envelope. No return address. Slipped into her mail tray between memos about scheduling changes and toner orders. Inside, a single piece of paper. Typed, centered. Stay in your lane, girl. No punctuation. No signature. Just the tone. Cold. Dismissive. Intentional. It didn't read like a threat. It read like a warning from someone who believed they had the right to give it. Camilla stared at it for a full minute before folding it and sliding it beneath the court calendar binder. She didn't show anyone. Not yet. Instead, she made 3 copies. One went into Naomi's archive. One into her encrypted external drive. And the third, she burned in a stainless steel sink behind the courthouse records room. Watching it curl to ash, she whispered only one word. Noted. The message didn't intimidate her, but it confirmed what she already suspected, that someone had been watching her steps, just like they'd watched Naomi's, that her prints were now visible on too many digital files, that someone was getting nervous. It wasn't hard to guess who. Captain Royce Keller's name had reappeared in internal circulation just days after Camilla received the footage from Malik Serrano. His reappointment as advisory consultant on court security protocol had been quietly posted to the internal judiciary newsletter, buried between cafeteria renovations and travel reimbursement guidelines. No fanfare, just placement. Strategic. Undeniable. He was back inside. And still, Officer Vonn hadn't been charged. His name had been redacted from public reports. He was listed as on extended medical leave. Meanwhile, Naomi's transfer was cited as routine redistribution. The system was writing a new script, erasing names, rearranging chairs. But Naomi refused to disappear. Every morning, she walked into courtroom 2A precisely at 9 o'clock, reviewed every file like it held the fate of a nation, and ruled with the same clarity she had in courtroom 4. Property dispute? She demanded evidence of ownership backdated 5 years. Custody case? She interviewed school counselors before issuing a word. Parking citation appeal? She ordered a full review of camera timestamps. It wasn't revenge. It was resistance. Because Naomi understood something the institution didn't. Power doesn't reside in the size of the case. It lives in the consistency of the person behind the bench. They could bury her under a mountain of small claims. she would just turn that mountain into a platform. And Camilla? She began tracking every unusual login, every file access that didn't align with the schedule, every security badge swipe that registered during closed sessions. She wasn't reporting anything yet. She was documenting, and behind them, Malik continued to monitor server behavior. He noticed an uptick in internal keyword filters, terms like Ellison, Serrano, J, and even hidden circuit footage. He routed all alerts to a hidden server node he named Echo 17. 3 people, 3 roles, and now a shared understanding. The system had launched its retaliation. But retaliation is a double-edged sword. It reveals more than it hides. It exposes not just fear, but who is afraid. So Naomi, seated in her dim office with its buzzing light and slanted desk, opened her laptop one more time. She typed a brief note to herself. They have begun. Then she saved it, not to her hard drive, but to a secure shared archive only she, Camilla, and Elijah Trent had access to. Tobias Quinn had spent 32 years in law enforcement, and he had learned 2 things that mattered more than any badge or weapon. Who speaks first shapes the story, and who stays silent shapes the outcome. For most of his career, Tobias had chosen silence, not because he lacked courage, but because he understood that inside institutions like theirs, truth didn't just cost reputation, it demanded sacrifice. And until now, he hadn't been ready to make that trade. But everything changed the moment he saw Naomi Ellison's name in a case reassignment memo, buried between 2 property disputes and a parking appeal. That name didn't belong in that context, not after what she endured, not after the courthouse footage had started leaking through cracks that could no longer be sealed. He knew what that kind of reassignment meant. He'd seen it before. He'd signed off on similar memos during his time as a sergeant, back when he believed in protecting institutional integrity, back when protecting the system meant protecting the lie. But now, Naomi wasn't just a judge. She was a target. And Tobias had heard the conversation that made that reality unfold. It had happened 5 weeks before the attack. A routine operations meeting, disguised as a security prep huddle, held in an upper-floor room that didn't appear on public maps. Only 7 people were present, and Tobias, assigned to internal archive transfers at the time, had been asked to sit in to log asset updates. Captain Royce Keller had led the session, laying out vague concerns about judicial unpredictability and exposure risk due to sensitive verdicts. But it was Craig Vonn who took it further. "Ellison's making too much noise," Vonn said, cracking his knuckles as he leaned back in his chair. "She thinks rulings can clean house. We need to neutralize the bench before it neutralizes us." The room didn't react. That was what scared Tobias most. No pushback, no objections, just nods. One officer even chuckled. Tobias had jotted the note into the margin of his assignment sheet. Vonn. Neutralize the judge. Keller present. No dissent. He had meant to forget it. He never did. Now, seated alone in the record sublevel beneath the courthouse, 6 floors underground, beyond any place the public ever entered, Tobias opened a drawer labeled RZ Internal Ethics Hold. His fingers paused on one folder. Confidential, COMS 937A. No description, no digital duplicate. Only a scrawled signature from a now-retired supervisor and a file stamp with the date, April 3rd, 2 weeks before the attack. He pulled the folder out. Inside, meeting minutes typed on off-white paper, the corners browned from neglect. Attached with a single rusted paperclip was a voice transcription, a printout of an audio file marked Hearing Prep. Non-trial sensitive. Bypass code 4D. Tobias read the transcript once, then again, and then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he wasn't supposed to know. A secure line that had quietly circulated among those who still cared more about justice than rank. Elijah Trent, He didn't speak when the line picked up. He didn't need to. Elijah's voice was calm. "Are you in position?" Tobias answered with a sigh. "I'm ready." 3 hours later, they met in the parking structure of an abandoned municipal building, now used for overflow storage, but rarely monitored. Tobias handed over the folder without ceremony, but Elijah noticed how tightly he held it before letting go. "They'll know it was me," Tobias said. Elijah nodded. "Yes, but it'll be too late." They didn't talk long. Tobias returned to the archives, and Elijah vanished into the fog. Evidence in hand, systems already moving. Camilla received a digital scan of the folder later that night. When she saw Vonn's quote, "Neutralize the bench," highlighted in yellow, she printed it, added it to Naomi's retaliation file, and underlined a phrase from Naomi's notes that suddenly burned with new meaning. They don't fear exposure. They fear disruption. Tobias didn't stop there. He began compiling other oddities. Notes from prior meetings, old emails between Keller and court liaisons, internal budget requests disguised as equipment upgrades, but routed through departments that handled surveillance logistics. He didn't just remember conversations. He remembered timelines. The day court microphones were quietly recalibrated. The week extra security was added to courtroom 4 without being requested. The moment one clerk was reassigned after refusing to approve a scheduling change that placed Vonn in proximity to Ellison's courtroom. He sent it all, every scan, every log. And when internal review opened their digital logs and saw the source, T. Quinn, Officer Archive Liaison, Tier 3 clearance. The same name that had signed dozens of routine compliance reports. The same man who had been dismissed as old guard, just clerical, retired in all but title. He was the system's memory, and now he had testified. 2 days later, during a closed-door committee session, Tobias stood before a panel of 3 oversight representatives, the room darkened for privacy preservation. He handed them a copy of the folder, and for the first time in his career, Tobias Quinn looked into the eyes of power and said words that did not protect the institution, but cut straight through it. They didn't need to say the word assault. They said neutralize, and no one flinched. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. One panelist closed his laptop. Another looked down and began scribbling something furiously. The third, young, probably new to this tier, simply whispered, "God." But Tobias didn't ask for thanks. He asked for action. Start with Vonn, then Keller. But don't stop there. Because this building, this structure, it doesn't survive by making decisions. It survives by letting them slide. When he walked out, no one clapped. No one followed. But he didn't need applause. He had given the system the last thing it expected from someone like him. The truth. It started with a flicker. At 4:12 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, a 38-second video clip was posted to an anonymous social media account called Judicial Watchdog 88. No caption, no hashtags, just the title, April 27th, Courtroom 4, Truth. The video began with static, then cleared to show a wide-angle view from the rear of the courtroom, unchanged from what the public thought they'd already seen. But 10 seconds in, the camera caught something new. Officer Craig Vonn, standing, still, calculating. The camera zoomed in, digitally enhanced, and there it was. The nod. That infamous, deliberate nod toward a man seated across the aisle. Captain Royce Keller. The same Keller who was never supposed to be there. The same Keller who had vanished from the court logs. He responded with the faintest tap of his finger on his forearm. A signal. And then Vonn moved, his hand to his hip, the taser drawn. The arc of blue light, the judge's collapse. And then the smirk. The footage cut to black. By 4:15 p.m., it had been viewed 7,000 times. By 4:30, 22,000. By 5 p.m., over 160,000 people had seen it. Within an hour, the hashtag #JusticeForNaomi was trending across platforms nationwide. And by the time the evening news tried to open with a controlled, scripted segment referring to the event as a medical anomaly, the city's official livestream server crashed under the flood of user demands for the real footage. It didn't matter how many denials came down from public relations offices or how many pre-cleared statements were released. The people had seen it. The veil had torn, and behind it, premeditation. For Naomi Ellison, still confined to a sparse, downgraded civil court office with peeling paint and a buzzing light overhead, the news came in pieces. She didn't have a personal social media account, but Camilla burst into her office at 5:12 p.m., holding a tablet already glitching from notification overload. "They posted it," she whispered, breath catching. "The real one." Naomi didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her hand moved to the pen on her desk, the same pen she had used to sign verdicts that unraveled entire precincts. Slowly, she uncapped it. Then she clicked record on the tablet's voice note function and said 6 words. "Let the record now show motive." At a federal office across town, Elijah Trent received 3 separate confirmation pings from the system. The footage was real, verified against internal archives. Not a fabrication, not a composite. Unedited truth. What stunned him wasn't the release, it was the timing. He hadn't leaked it. Neither had Camilla. And Tobias Quinn was still under a sealed confidentiality agreement following his testimony. This wasn't a mistake. This was a strategy. Someone had planned to drop the video after the testimony, after the threat notes, after the reassignment, after the veil of silence had stretched itself so far that it snapped. A crack, not in the case but in the culture. By 6 o'clock, major news outlets began scrambling. Some refused to comment. Others tiptoed around the video, referring to it as alleged footage or an unverified leak. But smaller, independent journalists didn't hold back. They replayed the nod, the hand signal, the officer's stillness in the face of a judge's collapse. They pointed to the timestamps. They brought up the missing logs. And most damning of all, they showed the smirk. Because the smirk didn't say, "I panicked." It said, "I knew." Meanwhile, users online began digging deeper. Court records, staff directories, past misconduct files. In under 3 hours, internet sleuths had connected the dots between Royce Keller's name, prior investigations, and his proximity to other neutralized courtroom officials over the years. Vonn's name became radioactive. Keller's even more so. By 7:48 p.m., the courthouse's external PR portal was locked down. Public comment forms were disabled. Emergency press liaisons issued a bland response. "We are aware of the video and are investigating the source of the unauthorized upload." That line did more harm than good, because it didn't deny the video's truth, only that it wasn't supposed to be seen. The silence from official channels became an answer of its own. Then something shifted again. At 8:21 p.m., a former prosecutor who had previously tried a case in Naomi's courtroom released a personal statement on her professional blog. "I saw that look in Officer Vonn's eyes once before, in a hearing where the evidence disappeared. I didn't speak up then. I'm speaking now." She ended her post with 3 words. "I believe her." Others followed. A former public defender, a retired judge, even a court reporter who once transcribed one of Naomi's rulings against internal affairs. The collective silence was beginning to collapse. Camilla stayed up all night coordinating secure backups. She archived every version of the video she could find. She downloaded statements, captured hashtags, took screenshots, because she knew how this worked. Digital truth disappears unless you preserve it like evidence. Naomi, meanwhile, remained in her dimly lit office, not giving interviews, not issuing grand declarations, just reviewing everything. She watched the video once, no reaction. Then again. On the third viewing, her voice broke the stillness. "Play it frame by frame." Camilla obeyed. And at one specific second, just before the taser, Naomi paused the feed. "There," she said. A moment so small, it had escaped most. The eyes of another staff member, Claire Dorsey, the courtroom transcriptionist, flickering toward Vonn. Her body shifting slightly in sync with his move. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition! Naomi leaned forward, whispering as if speaking to herself. This wasn't just coordinated, it was rehearsed. By midnight, over 4 million people had seen the footage. Justice for Naomi had sparked regional protests. Not massive, not yet, but focused, intentional, organized. In front of the courthouse, candles were lit. Placards were held. And one sign stood out. "We see you now." It was 9:27 a.m. when Judge Naomi Ellison entered the auditorium. Not a courtroom. Not a chamber. An auditorium. Once used for judicial trainings and press briefings, now transformed into the setting for something no one had a protocol for. A reckoning. There were no banners, no gavel, no official seal pressed in gold above the stage. Only a long wooden podium, a line of microphones without logos, and rows upon rows of chairs filled with people who had, until recently, kept their distance. On the front row, reporters, advocates, community leaders, judges, survivors. Behind them, clerks, former students, bailiffs with their hats off, and people who hadn't set foot in a courthouse since they'd been wrongfully dismissed by one. At the center of it all stood Naomi. She walked without assistance, though her pace had slowed since the attack. She wore no robe, just a slate blue suit, a white blouse buttoned to the collar, and shoes that didn't echo, because silence had become her weapon. The room was quiet, reverent. Cameras clicked, but no one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It wasn't closure. It wasn't victory. It was witness. Naomi stepped behind the podium. She didn't unfold notes. She didn't clear her throat. For a few seconds, she just stood there, facing the weight of everything. The lies rewritten. The footage leaked. The careers ended. The truth clawed back, inch by inch. Then, with the calm only earned through fire, she spoke. "I've been asked how it feels to stand again," she began, her voice low but unshaken. "I wasn't supposed to." A pause, a breath. "But I will not speak about pain. Pain has spoken enough. It screams through every silence this institution has built to contain it." She looked out across the crowd, not at the powerful, but at the public. Truth isn't found in verdicts. It's found in the records they tried to erase, in the footage someone saved, in the folder someone hid, in the name someone whispered, in the nod someone replayed, and in the face of a child who watched what justice should look like, and saw something else. As if summoned by those words, a small figure stepped forward from the third row. A girl, maybe 7, maybe 8, dressed in a faded yellow dress. In her hands, a single white lily, crumpled at the stem, but held with care. She walked to the edge of the stage, eyes wide, unsure. Naomi looked down. She didn't bend with ceremony. She didn't smile for the cameras. She simply knelt, slowly, and extended her hand. The girl gave her the flower. Naomi held it, nodded once, and stood. No tears, no applause, only the moment. The image would be replayed for days. The still photo would go viral within hours. Naomi Ellison, unsmiling, holding a bent white lily beneath a wall of microphones no longer needed. By noon, the footage of her speech had reached 5 million views. Not because it was explosive, but because it was still. because it refused to play the game of rage. It just stood and endured. At 1:15 p.m., the Department of Justice released its first statement acknowledging serious allegations regarding judicial sabotage at multiple jurisdictional levels. They announced the formation of a federal special commission to investigate not only the attack on Judge Ellison, but any systemic efforts to manipulate, suppress, or retaliate against judicial actors through covert or coordinated means. The phrase struck hard. Judicial sabotage. Not misconduct, not negligence, sabotage. By 5 o'clock, 3 senior court security officials had been placed on immediate leave. Captain Royce Keller's consultancy was terminated pending further review. Officer Craig Vonn, silent for weeks, was officially charged with assault with a weapon, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to interfere with judicial process. His attorney declined comment. His booking photo was released without fanfare. But this was bigger than charges, bigger than one courtroom, because behind Naomi stood a trail of those who had remembered. Camilla J., who cataloged and copied and encrypted the records they tried to bury. Malik Serrano, who pulled the footage no one wanted seen and delivered it frame by frame to those who still listened. Tobias Quinn, who broke 3 decades of silence to say the words no one else dared put in ink. And Elijah Trent, who, in a confidential hearing that same evening, presented 37 exhibits linking security protocol changes, budget reallocations, and badge access logs to a web of internal manipulation stretching back at least 7 years. He didn't raise his voice either. He just ended his statement with a single sentence. The rot didn't start with the attack. That was the moment it lost control. Across the country, smaller cracks began to appear. A judge in Denver requested her courtroom be swept for unauthorized surveillance. A clerk in Chicago stepped forward about altered digital logs. A public defender in Atlanta released transcripts from a hearing where a judge had been pressured to revise a ruling. The ripple had become a wave, and at its center, never shouting, never flinching, stood Naomi. She returned to work the next morning at precisely 8 a.m., declining interviews, ignoring reporters outside the gate. In her hand, the same white lily, now kept in a simple glass jar beside her desk. Not as a symbol, but as a receipt, proof that something bloomed, even after the arc of violence. She didn't call this justice, not yet. But it was something even rarer. It was accountability. And for the first time in a long time, the courtroom didn't just hold arguments. It held truth. What happened to Judge Naomi Ellison isn't just a courtroom story. It's a mirror held up to a nation that claims to stand on justice, yet too often turns away when that justice is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or dangerous to power. From the moment Officer Craig Vonn raised his taser in that silent courtroom to the second Naomi stood again before a nation that tried to erase her, this story reminds every American citizen of one truth. Silence protects systems, but action protects people. Over 7 million have now watched the footage they never wanted released. One nod, one signal, one collapse. But more importantly, one recovery. Naomi did not rise alone. She stood on the quiet courage of people like Camilla J., who preserved erased files. Like Malik Serrano, who risked his job to share the footage. Like Tobias Quinn, who finally broke the oath of silence to protect the greater oath of truth. These weren't heroes in capes. They were citizens with conscience. And if they can speak when it's dangerous, we must speak when it's possible. Because this isn't just Naomi's story. It's our system. When judges are punished for being fair, when evidence is edited before it's seen, when accountability depends on leaks instead of laws, then the foundation isn't broken, it's being dismantled quietly. And if we don't respond, we become part of the silence. But we can respond. Start by watching this full story. Then share it with your friends, your family, your community leaders. Speak it in places where it's uncomfortable. Demand transparency from your courts, your councils, your police commissions. Ask who decides what's hidden and what's shown. The system cracked because people inside it finally refused to forget. Now, it's our turn not to forget. So, if this story moved you, don't scroll past. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video to push it forward. And share it with 3 people who still believe silence means peace. It doesn't. It means pause. And that pause ends right now. In a country of over 330 million voices, justice doesn't fail because one person lied. It fails because too many stayed quiet. Don't be one of them. The reckoning has begun. Join it. Speak. Click. Share. Now.